Hello and welcome to another episode of the ResearchWorks podcast. Yes. I hope you're all having a great week so far, and we're so glad you decided to join us today.
Yes, it's so good to be back. I love these episodes. I love having these chats, and I can't believe this is what we get to do.
Me too.
Isn't it? So great. So hello to everyone, and get ready for another wonderful conversation. We have a lovely guest today, Dr. Iain Dutia from the Australian Catholic University joining us. Welcome, and thank you for being here, Iain.
Great to see you guys. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, very excited about this conversation. So excited about this article. And when I read the title of it, everyone will know why. It's titled The Power of Parasport, the Effect of Performance-Focused Swimming Training on Motor Function in Adolescents with Cerebral Palsy and High Support Needs, GMFCS Level 4, a single case experimental design with 30-month follow-up. And this was published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine in 2023. How did he get that title across the word limit? Because that's a long title.
It's a mouthful, isn't it? Yeah. In fact, it wasn't even it was a bit shorter to begin with. It was the editor's suggestion to go a bit longer. So there you go, yeah.
As long as they suggest it, you can go over the word limit. It's perfect.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Look, thank you so much for taking time to join us today, especially your article is obviously of great importance and something we're excited to jump into, but especially in light of the recent Paralympics in Paris. We're really looking forward to getting into your article more. Yeah. But before we do, like always, I want to tell all our listeners a bit more about you. Dr. Iain Dutia is a lecturer in physiotherapy at the School of Allied Health at the Australian Catholic University. He's also a research officer within the School of Human Movement and Nutrition Sciences at the University of Queensland. Iain has a background in physiotherapy with experience in physical activity for people with disability. His clinical and research interests are in the physical and mental health benefits of competitive parasport. He coordinates the Parastart program, a training and research program for people with complex disabilities participating in parasport. He is a member of the World Para Swimming High Support Needs Working Group, and he's also a para-athletics medical classifier and sits on classification advisory panels for both Athletics Australia and Paralympics Australia. So cool.
Really cool.
So this leads me to our icebreaker, which is unusual because normally icebreaker is like, you never know where it's coming from. But Iain, I'm so interested. What got you into the area you're in now and this area of research?
Yeah, so probably not a conventional path, I suppose. I'm from the UK, obviously, originally from Scotland, and started my career in musculoskeletal practice and in sports physio. I was a sports physio for a football team in England for a little while, and when I was doing that, I got interested in parasport and injury prevention for people with disabilities, and I started my master's over there. And soon after I started my master's, this PhD came up in Australia on parasport for people with complex disabilities. So I stuck in a speculative application, and then literally 2-3 weeks later, I was on a flight to Brisbane, to do my PhD in this area. So I went from musculoskeletal practice to sports physio to kind of parasport, and that's kind of merged into a bit of pediatrics and a bit of disability stuff. So yeah, maybe not the conventional route in, but I've enjoyed it.
That is so great. And it just shows how a career can evolve. Like where you start isn't where you're necessarily going to finish, and who knows what the future holds still.
Yeah, no, exactly. And never really thought I was going to do a PhD, or I didn't have much research interest when I was an undergraduate student, definitely. So that's what I'm telling undergraduate students now is you just see what pans out over time, because you never thought you'd go down that route. So yeah. Don't
write it off, really, isn't it? Like keep all the options open. I love that story.
Me too.
So great. Oh gosh. So what got me into this area would be, I'll go back to my undergraduate. It was complete accident. It was like, it doesn't have the great story that you have, Iain. It was really just when I graduated from physio, and even in physio, I didn't really know that the area of pediatrics really existed. Like it wasn't something that we ever focused much at university. It was always sports, right? And I'd done some sports training as an undergraduate. You do your taping and you're running out there on football fields, and me trying not to get hit by any balls as you're running out there. I don't get how sports trainers are allowed to run onto the field whilst they're playing, just FYI. That's just frightening. And then the idea of pediatrics came up, and it was just more out of intrigue and curiosity. It's like, what can we do? And I had no idea the scope or the potential of what the field could be like. But the minute I got into it, and then you start asking questions, right? You're like, well, why? Well, why can't we do this? And because you come into it quite naively, you're almost just assuming that things should just be the way it should be for everyone else. Mm-hmm. And with that perspective, that sort of, I guess, then got me curious, got me into research, because I just kept asking the question why. And I feel like that's all I've ever done since then. So it was by complete accident, based on the question why.
How wonderful, though, with so many benefits. Very exciting. I know we could ask a lot more questions about that.
What about you?
I started my physio kind of new grad position in a tertiary hospital in Perth and doing different rotations. And I really liked my rehabilitation, what are they called? Placements or rotations, because particularly in spinal rehabilitation and neuro rehabilitation. And I realised I didn't want to do acute, cardiorespiratory. That wasn't for me. Mm-hmm. And then I thought, do you know what? I think don't want to do inpatients anymore. I really want to go more outpatient rehabilitation. And it was actually just getting guided by good mentors, really. Yeah. Really fortunate to have good mentors that encouraged me to, then I had a passion to go into paediatrics and then to further my study and then to, get on board with some research projects, which ultimately led to my role now, which I love. So something I'm grateful for. And again, never could have imagined I end up in a role that I love so much. But again, it's that, like you say, curiosity, questions, and you just kind of follow the flow, don't you?
Mm. And if you're like you just travel to the other side of the world, which I just think takes a bit of bravery as well, and an adventure, a spirit of adventure.
Yeah. I was a bit younger then. That was nearly 10 years ago. So, but I think being able to follow your nose and choose is like it's quite a privilege, right? To just physio is great for that because you can go in so many different directions, and where you start usually isn't where you finish. So we're pretty lucky to have a profession that allows you to do that as well, because not everyone can do that. So it's nice.
It's so true. And I want to just pick up on that just for, it is well cited within the physiotherapy sort of industry, the average time frame that someone stays as a physio before they move on to something else. And I think a good 10 years ago when I first looked at it, it was like 7 years. And I think it's reduced down in terms of the average time people spend in the profession. And I would just really, it's such an amazing profession, just explore other areas. If you're in a place that you're not entirely sure that's what you like to be, just like you said, follow your nose, try to get some good mentors, ask the question why, be curious. There's heaps to do.
Yeah, there's so many options. It's teaching or research or business interests or mentoring, but you gotta have the... It's hard in those first years, isn't it? I think because it can be quite full on. But getting the chance to do the next bit, and then you get your head out of the sand a little bit and see what you can do to drive it forward. So, it is hard. I always think of the undergraduate students and what they're going to do in the first few years, because I think they're going to have quite a busy time ahead, and how many will stick around and how many will do things within the profession. It's tricky.
It is. But it's always great to share those insights, and thank you for sharing your story, because I didn't know anything about that. That was brilliant. And how great now to talk about an article that has got so much interest. So for everyone, let me just give you a bit of a rundown about what we'll be talking about today. So this paper examines the impact of performance-focused swimming training on adolescents with cerebral palsy and high support needs. So using a single-case experimental design, or a SCED, the research followed participants over 46 months to assess whether the training could improve motor function and prevent the typical motor decline seen in this population. The study's findings show that tailored performance-focused training can help maintain and even improve motor function in adolescents with severe cerebral palsy, challenging the assumption that motor decline is inevitable for these individuals. This study also introduced the novel concept of parasport as medicine, emphasising the importance of structured sport in maintaining motor function and promoting overall well-being. So much to love about this. So much.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Especially I've worked a lot with adolescents before, and I know it can be a tricky time. They're obviously, this is your expertise, which we'll go into more, but, the fact that you're looking into something that has so many benefits, not only physically, but mentally and emotionally is of such great value. So on this podcast, we've talked a lot about cerebral palsy and have focused on them, but haven't focused so much on the motor function described by the GMFCS in terms of the curves. We often will talk about the levels. Yeah. And we know these curves kind of go up at when children are young, and then they start to hit adolescence. And can you tell us a bit of what we commonly see in these gross motor function curves?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's actually a 2009 paper from Canada that it's a great study which followed longitudinally kids with CP through childhood and adolescence. So yeah, like you say, you get those early developmental gains up to the age of 7 or 8, and then kind of leveling off, and obviously at different levels depending on the GMFCS of the child. So, but it's after the age of about 7 or 8 years that level 1 and 2 kind of plateau off and level off and stay there through to the age of 21. But at levels 3, 4, and 5, what you start to see from the age of 7 or 8 is a decline in motor function, which continues through to the age of 21. We don't really know what happens after that yet. I think that study's still ongoing to find out what happens in adulthood, and if there's changes beyond the age of 21, because there may well be changes in level 1 and 2 that we don't know about yet. Like there's some evidence that obviously in adulthood they might have decline as well, or some of them might decline as well. But certainly there's a difference in childhood. Level 3, 4, and 5 tend to decline from the age of 7 or 8. So, and it's a functionally significant decline. And so far, there's not really meaningful interventions to prevent that or change that. There's some evidence that the orthopedic surgeries can keep level 3s more mobile for longer, but certainly at level 4 and 5, then we get this decline, and so far it's kind of classed as clinically inevitable, unfortunately.
Wow, gosh.
What do you think are some of the contributing factors to this decline in this group?
Yeah, and again, we don't really have a good idea of why. There's a few ideas out there. Some people would say that it's poor management of symptomology. You know, as kids get older, there's maybe less therapy. There's less adherence to therapy. There's certainly poorer management in adulthood than there is in pediatric services, right? So that transition from pediatric to adult services can decrease the quality of care. You know, what we suspected was actually that maybe people are just less physically active. You know, that's a big stark difference between 1s and 2s versus 3s, 4s, and 5s. As soon as you go off your feet, you know, you lose that habitual physical activity. And the other thing on physical activity is, you know, we all, our motor function all declines, right? Mine is declining right now. You know, as we get older, our balance gets not so good. We're not so strong. We can't change position so well. And if we look at how we manage that in older people, it's usually through exercise, right? So balance training and physical activity keeps people moving. Their motor function or their functional mobility is usually exercise based for longevity, right? So, but we don't really apply that to. You know, obviously, this is way earlier in life, but maybe if people are fitter and stronger, younger, and they can maintain that fitness and strength, they might be able to do more with their bodies and maintain that gross motor function that we think about.
I feel like this all leads so well into your study though, because, you know, you talk about that decline in adolescence, and then we know that there's reduced physical activity in adolescence, and then you've, you know, looked at something that is trying to promote that and build that, and I think that's amazing.
That is great. And we can all see that. You know, I know at the moment we're kind of hypothesizing this is the big reason why in terms of habitual physical activity potentially. But specifically now in your study, you really were focusing on, you know, GMFCS level 4 and 5, you know, that group of children. Now, can you summarize for us, I guess, what are the main gaps when it comes to this particular population? We talk about cerebral palsy as a whole, we talk about physical activity as a whole often, but this group of children, why is this one so, what are the gaps?
Well, I guess two big reasons. One is they're very understudied, right? So if you look at exercise trials for people with cerebral palsy, it's something like 4% of participants are level 4 and 5, whereas they comprise about 30% of the population, right? So they're grossly underrepresented in studies. So we don't really know much about their exercise responses at all. So they need to be included in studies, and perhaps we need studies that just focus on that group as well, because they're so different to your level 1s. So that's probably the first reason. The second reason is they're the least physically active subset of the population, right? So arguably they're the most in need. They'll get the greatest benefits from physical activity because they are the least physically active. So that's when the biggest gains are made, is when someone who's completely inactive gets active.
Yes.
That's when you get the greatest return, the greatest reduction in all-cause risk of mortality, right? So, and it's strange to think that the people who are maybe most in need are not the ones that are included in these studies, or not the studied ones. So I guess that's two reasons that we really focused on this group. There's one other reason. I'll chuck this in there. So, and this comes from parasport. So it's in the interest of parasport in Australia to compete at the elite levels across the board in all Paralympic events, right? And Australia does quite poorly. They're not represented in classes for athletes with high support needs, right? So all the way up to the elite levels of sport, there's not the athletes in Australia to compete there. So it was actually Swimming Australia and UQ kind of working together collaboratively to try and find out how we get athletes with high support needs into sport. That contributed to the start of the project as well. So it was kind of an industry issue as well. Yeah.
I love what came together to bring this about. It's amazing.
So good.
So in your study, you introduced the ParaStart, the Sports Training and Research Team Program. Can you tell us a bit more about it and how it addresses these challenges that we know about?
Yeah, great. It's ParaStart. So it stands for Para Sports Training and Research Team. So I should talk about the team. So Sean Tweedy was my PhD supervisor, still kind of a mentor for me, and Emma Beckman, still work with her a lot at UQ, and there's two other PhD students, Paula Wilson and Angelo Macaro, who I did this PhD with. And ParaStart, it's essentially a parasport training program for people with disabilities who want to compete in parasport. So if you've got a disability and you can't go down your local swimming pool or your local athletics club, and you can't participate that way, then you need a specialist program, and ParaStart is a specialist program, particularly for athletes with high support needs from the beginning. So you don't necessarily need sports experience. You just need to want to give it a go. And embedded in that program is a longitudinal research study. So we do a baseline before people start training, and then we get them into training, give them the support they need to try and be as good as they can in the sport they want to do, and monitor the long-term outcomes. So it's evolved over time quite a lot from where we began, and the NDIS has helped that a lot.
Beautiful.
But it's that's really what it's all about.
That's so great.
How was it putting that into practice?
Yeah, well, I think back to, this was 2015, 2016, when we were thinking about how to do this. We just had a question and we didn't know what we were going to do. But yeah, starting a sports club was kind of the way to go. So it was a bit intimidating, to be honest. Like, like how do we go about this? We didn't really know who we were going to be working with, how we were going to make it safe. We were going to coach them, and UQ Swimming Club and UQ Sport were really helpful in giving us access to the facilities. Then I guess it was a combination of physios and exercise physiologists to begin with, figuring out how to help people be good at swimming.
That's so great.
And it was quite a strange time when that's all I did was try and figure out how do we get these guys into sport and measure what happens.
That's brilliant.
But it was a long time. It was probably 18 months of planning, study design, and actually starting this sports club.
Wow.
So it was quite an organic type process.
Yeah, gosh, some of the best things come around from that, though, isn't it? Having the time to have that deep thought and collaborating and having discussions, essentially co-designing really is what you're kind of describing, isn't it? Which is the buzzword of research at the moment. Co-design is what you were doing.
Yeah. And making mistakes as well. It wasn't always perfect.
Of course.
Learning from that. Yeah.
That's incredible. Well, let's get into this study. And one of my favorite subjects is talking about single case experimental designs. And when I read that this was a multiple baseline design, I was like, oh, we've definitely got to get you onto this because we can ask you more questions about it. It's not often reported, like it's in the SCRIBE guidelines, it's the high level of evidence. We know about that, but actually doing it is a whole other thing. So do you mind just breaking it down for us? What is a multiple baseline design, and what does the study design look like for you in this particular paper?
Sure. So the multiple baseline design is a type of single case experimental design, or a SCED, right? So there's lots of different SCED designs. The multiple baseline design is one of those. And in a SCED, then each participant acts as their own control. So a participant will do a baseline phase of repeated measurements, and then you'll introduce an intervention or change the conditions and keep measuring those outcomes on the same person, and see what happens when you introduce or expose that person to the condition. And then you can withdraw it again. So you have phases, right? So a baseline phase is A, you might have an intervention phase of B, and then you might go back to A again. So you're kind of manipulating the conditions or the exposures that participants have, and repeatedly measuring the outcome over time. So the key thing is that people are their own control. So you're not comparing people against other people or grouping people together. You're actually just comparing someone against their own baseline.
And what was the target behavior that you were measuring throughout all of this? I mean, that's the key feature of this, isn't it?
Yeah. So for this study, we had obviously a baseline phase before we did any training. So our intervention was sport. It was sports training. So in baseline, we measured a lot of. We actually had 3 PhDs that came out of this with 3 people, right? So 3 participants, 3 PhD students. Yeah. So so it was very intensive. Like the main measure that is the focus of this paper is obviously the GMFM66 item set version. So we did kind of five measures of that in the first participant in baseline, and then got them into training and kept monitoring that over time. And the first part of the study was the multiple baseline 16 months ABA. So baseline training, withdrawal, rest period, another training period, and then another withdrawal period at the end. And I mean, that actually works with sport, right? Because
seasons.
It's a season.
Yeah.
It's seasons. Yeah. It's not responsible just to start training and keep training and never rest. So that was another part of choosing the design, was actually it works with sport, right? It's, you have withdrawal periods and you have periods of intensive training, and often you're building up to something at the end of a phase, like a competition. So it kind of another reason it fitted there. Yeah.
That works as life, I feel. Like when you talk about seasons, whether you're working with sport or not, there's just, you're not working hardcore all the time. Like we need breaks. You need to have leave to refresh, and, it's life as well, isn't it? So it's quite reflective for many things there.
Yeah. I mean, that's the great thing about longitudinal studies, right? So like we do this weird thing where we measure something for 8 weeks, find out that it works, and then we stop.
So it's done now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now go do that. Go do that in the real world. So it's like, well, I guess with a longitudinal study is you get something going and keep it going, and we'll keep it going for as long as people want to keep turning up to training. And in that period, there's all sorts of things that come up. There's obviously Christmases and birthdays and injuries and surgeries, but you just keep measuring, right? And that's, over time, what you get is the real picture of someone and all the things that happen, because these are the things that happen in people's lives over periods of years.
That's right.
But you don't capture that in 8 weeks. You capture that by monitoring people for a long time.
I love that. That's such
and the SCED is the only way to do that, really.
That's perfect. Can you tell me more about the item sets? Because as a target behavior, obviously a 66 can take some time to be able to measure each one. So that's why you chose to go item sets. Yeah. We don't talk about that very frequently. Do you mind just giving some background on the item sets and then how long it took for each one?
Yeah, sure. So like the SCED isn't perfect, right? Because there is a burden associated with repeated measures, right? You can't just keep testing and testing and testing someone, and especially with the GMFM66, which takes so long. So the item set is a kind of a abbreviated version of that, where it uses an algorithm to work out which set of items, a subset of the 66, you administer to a certain person. So obviously these guys were GMFCS level 4. So most of the, all of the running and jumping items are not relevant anyway. So you wouldn't be doing those. So, but what the item set kind of gives you is a structure and a format in which to. So it's maybe 10 or 11 items that really you focus on for that GMFCS level. And those are the ones that we monitored over time. So instead of doing 66 items, we maybe did 12 or 13. So that took 20 minutes. Yeah. And it's still got sensitivity to change, which is important.
Yes.
But it's not feasible to test someone to that degree. And it was a good measure for us because you can then extrapolate from the scores what the 66 score would be. So you can do that, but I think it's a good, useful clinical tool to know about because it can save you some time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was blinded, or what? How can you do that in the SCED?
Yeah, so we had a blinded assessor who wasn't involved in any of the training. So they'd come in every week and do the testing sessions, and we'd be training for the rest of the week. So,
so they have no idea whether they were in withdrawal at the time or they were actually doing intervention.
That's it. So they're blinded to the phases when they start training, when they stop. So
that's great.
And now this leads, you've already alluded to some of this, your aims of your study and what you really wanted to focus on. I know you've mentioned the gross motor function and looking at that, but can you tell us a bit more about your aims and where you wanted this study to be directed?
Yeah, good question. Thinking back how we started. So the gross motor decline was one question. The other question was actually just about feasibility of physical activity accumulation, right? So how much training can we actually do, and what does it look like? So we monitored the training load, which is, we used a kind of RP minutes per week. So you kind of take a rating of perceived exertion, times it by the duration, and you get a kind of a metric which comprises both the intensity and the duration. So you get a volume of training per week, and you can work out compared to guidelines how much people are doing, right? Compared to physical activity guidelines. So
great.
So we wanted to see how close can we actually get people up to guidelines, or is it too much? Is it unfeasible? Well, what happens, right? Do people get injured or unwell, or is it just not possible? So that was another aim, was to quantify how much training can be done. And also performance, right? So there's a performance outcome as well. So we had no data on how to coach this group or how rapid they might improve, how rapidly they might improve, whether they would improve or not. So performance was an important outcome as well. You can't really do a performance-focused sports intervention and not measure performance. So that's what that was always all about, really, getting faster.
Yeah.
And I love how you wanted to look at, we know, like talking at the start, those GMFCS curves, the gross motor function declines in adolescents, but particularly for this group, the 4s and 5s. And so to see whether, the adolescents partaking in this program had that same functional decline, which we will get to next.
We will get to.
Brings me to my next question about the participants. Can you describe in a bit more detail the participants that you had in this study?
Yeah, so we had an N of 3, right? So small group. 3 teenagers, age 15 or 16, I think, when we first met them.
Wow.
So busy with school, high school, all GMFCS level 4 with CP. So I guess that's probably the main details.
Yeah.
They were all keen to try it.
Yes.
That was the main.
There was a motivation
thing.
there. Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. And I did one presentation down at what was CPL at the time to an allied health group, and recruited all 3 within one presentation. So that was it. We only had room for 3 really, and we had 3 motivated young people who we met and said, "This is what we're going to do. Do you fancy giving it a crack?" And they all said yes. So.
Wow, and what an investment for them as well, right? Obviously, they wanted to train, but also to be part of a study with providing all this amazing information.
Yeah. Well, the nice thing about having such a small group is we could pour everything into 3 people, right? So it was our job to remove as many of the barriers as we could, and give them what they needed to try and be as good as they could be. So it was like a perfect little world that we were living in, and it certainly suited us, and I hope it suited them as well. And
so great.
Like the main thing is they're still going.
That's
right?
amazing.
So that
speaks volumes. Can you tell us a bit more about the intervention then?
Yeah, I'm very excited to hear.
Dosage, what they did. Gosh, so much to go into.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. And again, it was a fun time because we kind of had the reins. So the goal was to get better at sport.
Yeah.
And by the way, at the time, not all of them could swim, right? So that wasn't an inclusion criteria.
Oh, yes. Okay, I missed that point.
Yeah. There's not that many people who are GMFCS IV who can swim, out there ready to go. So, so one of them was really pretty good in the pool, but the other two needed to experiment with strokes and find their body position in the water. We were working with coaches at UQ, and Angelo was a coach himself. So it was a kind of combination of physio and swim coaching that kind of allowed us to experiment. But the intervention was let's do 50 meters as fast as we can in whatever stroke works for you. So to do that, there was obviously a lot of pull work to experiment whether they were better on their front or their back, mostly better on their back. And then there was work in the gym, so strength training, but also like to build like a bit of an aerobic base. We're going from nothing to trying to swim for 50 meters without using your legs. It's pretty aerobically taxing as well. So a bit of balance and postural control stuff, but everything was geared towards their stroke.
Right.
So it was all about getting them swimming, minimizing drag and maximizing propulsion. Basically, that's all we were trying to do.
Did you ever have to use floats or any assistive devices, whether it's, I'm not familiar in the world of swimming, but things to help them and assist them? Yeah.
So certainly to begin with, there was pool noodles. They were probably the most effective. We did use some like flotation belts to help people get a bit higher in the water, to learn what that feels like, to increase their awareness of where they are in the water. Yeah. And over time, we kind of gradually withdrew those because the goal was always to swim according to the para swimming rules. So obviously no flotation devices. So we use them as coaching and practice tools.
So cool.
But yeah, it was. We still do sometimes, paddles. There's lots of little, not too dissimilar probably to swimmers without disability. Kind of use them as and when, but the goal was always get rid and just you. Yeah.
Wow, that is just brilliant. I love that. Okay, so we've been.
It was a fun time.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can just imagine what that would have been like to be part of that and part of that discovery and process. Now we've been dying to get into the results, and there's so much to explore here. So we'll hand it over to you just to describe the results in the way that you want to present them, and let's explore it from there.
Yeah. Okay. Let's maybe start with gross motor function, shall we?
That's good.
Let's go straight to that.
Yep.
I think. Yep. Yeah. And there's probably two parts to the results. So the first is the multiple baseline design results. So that's that kind of 5-phase ABA. So, and what we were looking at was changes when we introduced the intervention and then when we withdrew it. So did things improve when we started training, and did they decline when we stopped in each person? So, and we all had varying length baselines, which were actually fairly stable, but not exactly stable. So it actually makes you think about, pre-post designs. You're like, what's a good day? What's a bad day? When you just do something.
100%.
Yeah. And when you just do the same measure over and over, you start to get a feel for what's just within the noise level,
That's right.
So that was interesting, just that baseline without any intervention. But they all improved when we introduced the intervention. That was probably the biggest improvement in that first 16 weeks. Then they all declined when we withdrew, which was a 5. Yeah, they declined, right? So, and that was pretty key. That was, the fact that they declined when we withdrew was just as important as the fact that they improved when we introduced the training. So, then we trained again and they got better again, and then we withdrew and they declined again at the end. So not immediately. There's that kind of lag time, right? It's not as if you don't train on Thursday, so your gross motor function's worse off the next week. There's that kind of there's that lag time. But that happened within the SCED in all 3.
Wow.
So it was quite surprising actually this, the responsiveness of that.
That's so interesting. We wouldn't know that otherwise, actually, if you hadn't done a study design like this. You never get to see this.
No, well, this is the key, right? So, like, imagine we just had two big groups, and we were comparing this group of what we think are similar people.
Yes.
And we don't know. In a SCED, what you learn is who responds, when they respond, and the degree to which they respond.
Yep.
So you don't get any of that from a group design.
No.
You just have this average response, which doesn't actually exist, right? It's just a construct.
That's right. Can I ask you on that then, just so I don't forget? In your paper, you show the graphs beautifully, which in a SCED, visual analysis is part of the process, right? So you can actually see very clearly the AB. You could see it like, improvements and reductions. Now, how do you actually analyze that on top of a visual analysis? Because there's a proper process by how you do that. Do you mind just touching on that quickly?
Yeah, there's a few options, and there's more and more kind of statistical options that are coming out for this design. We use something called an interrupted time series simulation analysis. So what that does is it essentially artificially increases the sample size. So there's all kinds of responses you could get within one phase change, and this simulates many different alterations of what could happen and compares that to actually what did happen. So what you get is an effect size from one phase to the next. And simulation analyses are getting more and more, getting used more and more widely, particularly in small heterogeneous populations. And this was a good option, I think, for us.
Yes.
The other thing is what I'd love to do in the future is if you have more SCEDs like this, you can aggregate the data, right? So you have an aggregated N of 1 trial. So we've got 3 at the moment, but in 20 years we might have 50, right? And you can start to, it's kind of like a meta-analysis of those effect sizes. So, and you're looking at within person changes, again, not kind of group changes. So I think that's the strength, and that was part of what we want to do with the data that we have now in the future, is start to aggregate it across trials.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Now, coming back to, I'm going from a very novel researcher. I'm still always trying to develop my research skills as well. But I remember at university and even in recent years, sometimes you learn that the power of research study is about the number and the participants. But what I've really learned in the last 12 months is the power of a single case design, because it gives you that, like you said, almost like a lens and a viewpoint to look at something with such detail that you can get these results and things that come from it that you may have missed if it was done in a larger style design, particularly when you're starting up a program in this case.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And so the key was obviously comparing within each person, but also that it gives you the scope to individualize the intervention for each person, right? So in a group trial, you really have to have a standardized intervention for everybody in the group, right? But that's not how it works in real life.
Yeah.
That's not what we do in clinical practice, and that's certainly not what you do in sport. Where you need to modify training and individualize it based on what you see and what the data tells you. So the SCED allowed us to do that, which was really important. And maybe this is a bit controversial, but let's see.
Put it out there.
There's this huge amount of heterogeneity, right, in the population of people with CP from GMFCS 1 to 5. That if we'd had a group trial, like what is actually the feasibility of having two groups that are really the same, So especially at GMFCS level 4 and 5, where the heterogeneity increases, right? So we have more comorbidity, we have higher prevalence of intellectual disability and seizures and all sorts of other things going on. So two people at GMFCS level 5 with athetoid CP and spastic hypertonia are totally different, right? So they might be the same if we stratify groups by GMFCS, like the same on GMFCS, but I'd argue that that's a huge limitation, and there's always this kind of tension between sample size and heterogeneity, right? So if we need a big sample, say we need 100 people, what do? We go try and chase 100 people and we get 50 and we go, oh man, we need more people. So we start to relax our inclusion criteria. So then we get more heterogeneity, right? We widen the age group. So we say, well, let's look a bit further afield, whatever we do. So we, in this search for numbers, what we sacrifice is internal validity.
Yes.
What the SCED does is it prioritizes internal validity over external validity. So this isn't generalizable. That's not what we get with 3 people. But what we get is really strong internal validity that we're certain that we know that these people responded in this way, right? So I think, I'm not saying we should never do RCTs ever again, but I think the SCED can really complement it, and those aggregated N-of-1 trials, particularly where we've got a small heterogeneous population who need individualized support and individualized interventions at level 4 and 5. There's also the feasibility, like how do you manage 100 people at GMFCS level 4 and 5? You're getting them into swimming pools. It's how are you going to make that safe? So there's a pragmatic bit as well. But I think that the argument about the heterogeneity, and this is what Sean, Tweedy, and I talk about quite a lot, is I think that's a stronger argument than any pragmaticism. Is actually, do we really have a homogenous group here at GMFCS level 4? Not sure.
It's a really, really interesting and important conversation to have, and I think I've been thinking about a lot of these a lot lately as well. I'm a huge SCED fan, and obviously see the role this has in understanding this population and the interventions we apply. So back to your gross motor and how the withdrawal of the intervention saw a decline. So let's talk about that a little bit and why you think that is the case.
Yeah, good question. And I think it's probably good to look at the wider results as well. So not just within the SCED, but thinking about, so what we did in the longitudinal analysis was compare the projected trajectory of decline versus what actually happened. So going back to that, the 2009 article, that shows the curves. The
Hannah article.
Very helpfully, they very helpfully published the regression models behind those curves. So what you can do is use them to predict where someone might be based on their baseline scores. So that's what we did. We looked at the baseline of where these guys were, and thought, right, if they follow this curve, this is where they're going to be in 3-4 years' time. And we compared that to what we saw. So why did they not decline? They kind of maintained their function. Well, they improved and then maintained the function in the trial. It wasn't all improvement. They hit a plateau. And why did they do that? Well, and we don't really know, by the way, because we didn't study this, but this is just my opinion on it. I think it largely due to strength and postural control and just being fit and strong and being able to move themselves. So a lot of the items which they improved on were things like sitting and moving from 4-point kneeling into sitting, for example, or rolling over, getting up from a prone position into sitting, right? Which is functionally helpful for someone at GMFCS level 4. But to do that, you got to be strong in your arms. You got to have, you got to use as much trunk as you've got. And you got to be aware of where your body is in space. And most of what we did in the pool was about being strong with your arms, having your trunk high in the water so you're not dragging along, and knowing where your body is in space. So, I know we're going to talk about specificity in a second, but you're training things without meaning to train them, Well, I feel like I've got so much to say, I don't even know where to start.
I feel a bit the same. You go first.
Well, I mean, I guess when we talk about, we spoke just last week actually about a postural control systematic review with Monica Tui, and we talked a lot about, what interventions could we be looking at? What is specific? And we often talk about postural control and what that actually means. And we talk about meaningful activities that you can repeat. And so things like being upright in a supported stepping device, for example, in someone who's GMFCS level 4, we found in our previous studies too that they improve in the A and the B sections in particular of the GMFM, which makes sense because we didn't work on sitting. We didn't work on those particular tasks, but they were upright for more periods of time. They were engaged. They were using the arms. They were changing directions in the walker. Like they're doing things that actually work on postural control within a functional task repeatedly rather than just, sitting on something waiting for someone to push them over and go, oh, I've got to work on that. There is a volume there that's associated with it. And that seems to be what you've managed to achieve in the swimming training, because there was, they were training for periods of time, and that's the sort of dosage that you require. It's not how many times can we push someone over and they can push themselves up again. There's a volume there, right? I don't know if I've explained it properly.
Yeah,
can you help me?
yeah, and I'd like to know what you think about this as well, because this is just my thoughts now. So, but when we got these guys into swimming, there was so much incidental stuff that happened at every training session, right? So if you think about it, it's not just the swimming. It's, okay, they come in 3 times a week. So that's 3 taxi rides, 3 transfers into the pool, 3 transfers out of the pool. After every lap, they'd stand in the water and wait for instructions, recover, right? So how many minutes of standing did they accumulate in the water, holding on to the side, right?
Yeah.
Not because that was what they were told to do or what they wanted to do, or because they wanted to improve their postural control. That was just part of training, right? They were there to get faster. They got no interest in their postural control or their motor function. No. They wanted to get performance, qualified for nationals, right? That was what they were all about. Yeah. So I agree with you. I think it's incidental. A lot of the work that was done, just time in the water, just time on task, time using your trunk and using your arms. Yep.
I think we need to stop breaking it down so much. We need to stop breaking it down to we just want to work on postural control. We're talking about real life goals like anyone else does. So we're looking at the whole task. I know, so I've just interrupted because this is what happens when I get excited. There's much to talk about. But I would agree, the volume of what they're doing in a place where they're going, I just want to get better at this. This is a true goal. This is autonomy. It's a human right. And here they are getting a good go at it. And you said they were doing some strength training as well. So think about all the opportunities they got there, where they were strengthening a muscle, not for the sake of strengthening a muscle. They were strengthening for a purpose of, and that is a motivating factor. And then you get actual proper engagement. It's active. It's self-initiated. It's all the right stuff if you want to talk about the mechanisms. I don't know. And
for a group that's adolescents, the key thing is the buy-in. You got that motivation. Once they're doing that, and then they can. That's a key part.
Yeah.
Yeah, because and to be honest with you, they'd done so much therapy that they weren't keen on that anymore. Which is so common. Or not. And as a physio, I could see all this stuff happening, but it was so self-directed. Sport was the magic ingredient. That's what's kept them going. And the thing about parasport is there's a structure there, right? There's qualifying times for nationals. There's classification systems to make competitions legit. So it's all there. It's all waiting for people with disabilities to go and try and be as good as they can be. We're not coming up with anything different there. Sport's been around forever. This isn't a novel intervention. This is right in front of us. So, that's where the buy-in came from, and that's where the longevity comes from, right? So these guys might keep swimming. They're 21 now, I think, 22, and they might just keep going all the way through their life potentially, right? Think about adult swimming. Think about masters, right? There's people do this, and there's no reason why these guys, if they want to do it, can't keep doing it.
It'd be great to track, the long-term impact on reducing, whether it's hospitalizations for, cardiorespiratory illness, medication needed for digestive issues, other things, because of the, like you said, the many benefits is you're capturing it at this time when the gross motor function normally declines. Instead, they've improved it slightly and then maintained it, and then they're continuing to be physically active, which is what often is, doesn't happen in these GMFCS groups.
Yeah, that's right. So, Iain, for you, is there anything else that really stood out to you in terms of results? I mean, obviously I hijacked that one talking about a whole lot of other stuff, but that was pretty cool. I mean, it's a cool finding.
I think that's the longevity is the amazing bit.
Yeah, I think so.
I think that's the most surprising thing. I mean, I should say it's not for everyone, right? This isn't the panacea to all of the issues, that we could possibly think of. It's more like I also think we should simplify it a little bit. This is sport. It's not that new, and we should be better at getting people into sport if they want to do sport. It's not for everyone. That's probably the most common question or query I get is, well, actually, how are we going to motivate people to go and do this 3 or 4 times a week? And it's like, well, you're not. No. It's not. That doesn't happen in the general population either. No. So not everybody wants to do sport, but some do. Yeah. And I think this is like a brick in the wall. Here's one option.
Yes, I agree. Yeah. Here's
a tool that might be useful for some of the people that clinicians see on the front line, the guys who do all the hard work. So I think just knowing what it is and what it can do for who is really important, because maybe we got lucky with 3. These guys were really super motivated and well supported. There is that thing in the back of my head saying, well, is that everybody if we take away the barriers, or some people just it's not for them, and there might be something else out there which might do a similar job. But it's not sport. It might be something else.
It shows the value of trying to find someone's motivation, and that is for everyone. And I agree, not everyone's into sport. Like I don't mind watching it, but I'm not that great at it, so I don't do it. But there's other things that motivate me. But I think if we can find that, invest time in our young people of what that might look like. Swimming, wouldn't have thought that would improve GMFM being something so specific, but when you break it down, look at the components of it, it makes a whole lot more sense. So maybe we need to do more task analysis in that way to kind of go, what are we actually doing? But gosh, so great.
Now, I have so many more questions, but we will bring it all together. So obviously I know you've done with these 3 participants, and I just have so many questions, but I'll bring it all down to where to from here. What are you going to look at, and what are you looking at?
Sure. So, well, I think, like you said, we need more trials, more SCEDs. So we're actually just starting one in spinal cord injury now as well. So people with high spinal cord injury. So we've got 3 PhD students again ready to go at UQ. It might not be swimming, just with the head control issues. So that's the other thing we need to look at is other sports. Yes. So we might get a different response in athletics, right? Our land-based sport. Sarah Reedman's doing some great stuff in race running, right? Or frame running. Yeah. So other populations and other sports is the next 2 steps. Same design, longitudinal. Let's get people into sport and see what happens.
Love that.
That's the priority. And I guess the other thing is how, what's available for athletes with high support needs. What does it look like? Yeah. So we've done swimming, which isn't amazing for everybody. Like I said, like the spinal cord injury group, that's probably not going to be the answer. Yeah. So what does it look like? What it's not equally as important as the what happens is like, what does it look like? What sports, what activities? So we need more there, particularly at level 5, where it could look very different.
Yeah, yeah. Stay tuned. I can't wait for
I love
more.
your passion behind it too.
It's so great. It's so good. Well, to all of our listeners, look, we're not done yet, because of course we're going to head to our next segment, which everyone loves, Tell It to Ed. Ed, as you know, is our producer. He doesn't have a background in child health, but he loves listening to these episodes, and sometimes I think he wishes he was a healthcare professional, I think, is what I get from this. But before he launches into his question, Iain, I'll get you to summarise what we've spoken about in about 60 seconds or so, and Ed will have time for one question. So Iain, take it away.
All right. And so what this study was all about was getting people with cerebral palsy and complex disability into sport and giving them the chance to try and be as good at swimming as they could possibly be. What we did was we measured gross motor function over a long period of time. So that's how they move around, how well they kind of sit and crawl and do other activities that they need to do in daily life, and see if they maintained that function over time, because we know that this group typically lose that ability over time. So they improved and maintained their improvement over a long time and got better at swimming, and they're still involved. So that kind of that's where the title, the power of para sport, came from. It's all about quantifying the therapeutic value of para sport for people with disability.
That's a brilliant summary.
Well,
have you used that one
brilliant.
Before? That was good. That was really good. All right, Ed, over to you for one question.
One question. So
He tries to take over. He always tries to take over.
I do. I try to sneak in a second question. And I've loved this whole talk about, the competitive sports as therapy, I guess, in some way. And I think you guys covered like a lot of the topics that I might have asked a question on, and I had a question about how this might translate to other sports. And I guess I just wanted to circle back a little bit to the element of motivation and my own very limited experience in sports and training and working out and that sort of thing, is that seeing like the little improvements, the little achievements, the ticking off a particular time or to get a little bit faster or to lift a little bit more weight was really motivating. And it was something that I saw very quick results. And I guess my question is how that can kind of be generalised a little bit about the element of motivation in therapy, and whether there's something a little bit like if you've ever played a video game, there's like all these little secrets and things that you kind of collect in video games, but there's this achievement element. You unlock little achievements for little tasks, and sport, I think, lends itself to that. So I just wonder whether there's just something in that where it needs to be more generalised to therapy in general, for want of a better word.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think you bang on. So little wins. I still remember the first time that one of the participants swam across like a 5-meter pool, right? And he got up there and he punched the air, right? It was the first time he'd made it by himself, right? So now he's this close to qualifying for nationals, right? So he's gone a long way from there. But the first time he made it across without one of us, scooping him off the bottom of the pool. So it was a little win, but how motivating to have that in the bag, right? It's you're absolutely right. It's a little win, and then it's 10 meters, and then it's 10 meters a little bit faster. And yeah, it's especially teenagers who want to be good at something, right? They need they have to have. I did that, I can do that. Yeah. And creating an environment, I think, for these young guys to go and get a little win, because everybody can get a little win if you create the right environment. I think that was key in the beginning, right? So no, it's a great question. I think you're absolutely right. Yeah.
I love that.
Incremental challenge with the motivation embedded.
Yeah. And creating those opportunities for them to have that, like real opportunities. You don't want it to be like a fake win. Like, people know what that is. You want something that's achievable. Yeah. Great question.
And especially in para sport, it's all there. You can compare yourself. As soon as you can swim 50 meters, you can compare yourself to the world champion, right? So
love that.
There's the motivation. There's your qualifying time for states. There's your qualifying time for nationals. So it does so much of the work for you. The para sport does that maybe we don't have in therapy, so easily. We don't have that comparison. And it also means that some people aren't going to win, right? And that's okay too. Not everybody's going to be a Paralympic champion. That doesn't make you... but that doesn't affect your gross motor function either. It's the training that does it, not who wins. So, so it's about trying. It's about trying to be as good as you can be, rather than getting there. So, but yeah, the sport itself does so much of that for us that we didn't really have to do too much of that.
That's brilliant. Gosh, that is so wonderful. Gosh, to everyone who's been listening, I hope you've really enjoyed this episode. We'll put links to this paper on our website, researchworks.net. Really encourage you to have a look. The graphs are amazing, really thought-provoking. And of course, there's a CPD form there that you can fill out as well to keep this as part of your record of your PD requirements. But for now, as I don't want to say goodbye, but thank you so much, Iain, for your time and for the conversation and the thoughts around a lot of this. It's amazing.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's very inspiring.
Yeah.
Nah, thank you. Thank you for having me. I loved it. Thanks so much.
Oh, wonderful. Well, to all of our listeners, we'll talk to you all again very soon as we head towards our 200th episode. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.